Well, good afternoon and welcome. I am State Senator Mark Johnson, Senate Republican leader. I enjoyed speaking with many of you last week about the Minnesota Senate Republican priorities and what we're going to be rolling out this year. And as promised, today is the first of several of those presentations that we're going to be giving to the press and to the public about what Senate Republicans are going to be doing this time, especially when it comes to fraud. Over the summer and fall, the headlines were peppered with these fraud reports. A shuttered housing program where fraud was so bad the program couldn't be saved. Reports of disabled and vulnerable adults being left for hours, days at a time, even when fraud providers were billing for full days' work. Some of these people passed away, and families are left questioning if the care they didn't receive is why they passed away. Democrats will try to point to pages of changes they've passed, but the reality is, in the culture in this state government, it's not something you can just tweak. We need a top-down reform of how we manage the state welfare programs, including how they're including built-in accountability measures, new technology to assist the verification and delivery of services, and strict oversight of the taxpayers' dollars. You'll hear some of these ideas today, but this is just the beginning. As we learn more about the fraud schemes that have robbed taxpayers of billions of dollars and stolen from those most in need of that support, we'll have more to say about how to fix Minnesota's fraud problem. With that, I am proud to turn it over to the good Senator Kreun.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. My name is Senator Michael Kreun. I represent District 32, which is Blaine, Ham Lake, Lexington, and Columbus in Anoka County. I was the lead Republican author on the bill that passed the Senate last year that would create an Office of Inspector General. I'll just start out by saying that Minnesotans are tired of getting ripped off. I've been hearing it over and over again when I'm back in my district. They're watching other people run scam companies. They're seeing it with their own eyes. They're seeing it on TV. And they're seeing that these thieves are getting rich off of their tax dollars and off of their hard work. And Minnesotans are sick of it. They're beyond done with it. And what I've seen is that Minnesotans overwhelmingly agree that we need an independent, statewide Office of Inspector General that will be the taxpayers' watchdog, their watchdog, to be independent and work for all of them and not just the governor. This bill was rare. It was a truly bipartisan effort to address the most important issue our state is facing right now. It was the best of what this legislature can accomplish. Unfortunately, it appears that the House Democrats continue to play politics with it. They are the only caucus who appear to be letting their ideology and partisanship get in the way of what Minnesotans expect, a good bipartisan bill that will be effective in preventing fraud and holding people accountable. Make no mistake, our Office of Inspector General bill will not be gutted. There's no point to creating an office with no teeth. And there's no need to create an office just to create an office and say we're doing something. The new office must be able to do its job and to do it independently. Now, of course, we're always open to minor amendments to make the bill better and to make the Office of Inspector General more effective. And like I always do, I will roll up my sleeves to make that happen. But we will not move backwards. And the next topic that I'm going to talk about is Senate confirmation of agency commissioners. The Minnesota Senate needs to take back its rightful place in confirming agency commissioners. It's a disgrace how Senate Democrats have not required Senate confirmation for so many appointees. Senate confirmation is basic checks and balances in our government. It is the people's voice in choosing who will be running these important government agencies. Under Democrat control, we have 12 acting or temporary commissioners in important agencies who have not been confirmed by the Senate, running these agencies without Senate confirmation and without approval by the people. This includes the Department of Human Services, the agency most overrun with fraud, and ironically, that temporary commissioner of which still asserts that we have no more fraud than any other state. We're in the middle of the biggest welfare fraud scandal in American history, right here in Minnesota, and we don't even have a commissioner overseeing the Department of Human Services that has been confirmed by the Senate, where most of that fraud is occurring. We've been operating with a quote-unquote temporary commissioner now for over a year. That is an embarrassment. Senate Democrats codified this nonfeasance when they passed a law gutting the Senate confirmation process a couple of years ago when they had their trifecta. And now they're allowing commissioners to be automatically confirmed by omission by simply not having a confirmation vote, and then they're automatically confirmed within 60 days after appointment. Our bill will repeal that change and require that the Senate have to have a confirmation vote on commissioners. No more never-ending acting or temporary commissioners running these agencies without confirmation. The Senate must step up and assert its rightful place of ensuring oversight and accountability. Senate Republicans are prepared to do that, and Senate Democrats should not get in the way. And up next, we have Senator Jordan Rasmusson.
Thank you, Senator Kreun. Good afternoon. I'm Jordan Rasmusson, Senator from Fergus Falls. I also serve as the lead Republican on the Senate Human Services Committee. Minnesota has a fraud problem. We've heard from career prosecutors that billions of dollars have been stolen through industrial scale fraud. Minnesotans know and are outraged by this fraud problem. However, the Walz administration refuses to recognize this crisis. DHS currently has a website up that states that Minnesota is leading the nation in fraud detection efforts and that Minnesota's fraud problems are not uniquely bad. In order to fix this problem, we need to first acknowledge that Minnesota has a fraud problem. Today, Senate Republicans are presenting an action plan that will protect taxpayers and protect services for the most vulnerable Minnesotans who rely on them. One cause of Minnesota's fraud problem is that many DHS services are on budget autopilot. When autism services and housing stabilization services grew by multitudes year over year, the state of Minnesota just kept on paying without asking tough questions. We will be introducing a bill to stop blank checks for DHS and DCYF services. If a service exceeds its budgeted amount by 5%, the Office of the Legislative Auditor will be required to audit and review the service to explain the cost overruns. If a service exceeds its budgeted amount by 10% or more, the legislature will be required to review and approve additional spending for that service, giving the opportunity for additional oversight and reform. This bill will help us catch issues before a service becomes consumed by fraud. Another problem that causes fraud is that DHS has not implemented basic program integrity measures that are standard in other states. For example, many states require electronic visit verification for PCA services and other services. In addition, client sign-off or verification can provide another safeguard that would have caught examples of brazen fraud. In Minnesota, they've been talking about implementing these requirements for years, but have failed to do so and failed to protect taxpayers. We will be introducing a bill to require accelerated implementation of these basic program integrity measures. And with that, I will turn it over to Senator Drazkowski.
Good afternoon, everybody. Senator Steve Drazkowski from Mazeppa, Senate District 20. The first bill I'm going to talk about is Senate File 2625. It's the do not pay list. I introduced this last year and it's still active for the biennium. We're going to continue to work to bring this forward. It's modeled after the Federal Office of Management and Budget do not pay list that they maintain there amongst, I believe it's at least 4 or maybe 5 federal agencies that contribute to this shared database of individuals and entities that are ineligible to receive government payments. So they're doing this at the federal level. I'm proposing with this bill, we do it in Minnesota, and we put together a system that will provide to agencies that are supposed to be fiduciarily responsible for our money the ability to make certain they're not making payments to people that shouldn't be getting them. Payments to people and entities. So with this, all state agencies would contribute the data to this do not pay list. All state agencies would be required to use it, and they would then use it against vendor contracts, government loan recipients, and government payment recipients. It would make certain that we include dead people in there so that dead people aren't getting money, because we know in many of our programs, especially the next bill I'm going to talk about deals with Medicaid and medical assistant, a lot of dead people in these programs that are either getting paid or being paid for through a managed care organization that we shouldn't be paying for. People convicted or suspected of fraud would be part of this database. All of those agencies could contribute to it, and all of those agencies could benefit from reviewing it before they send a dollar out to an individual or an entity to make certain that they haven't already defrauded this huge government that we have in the state of Minnesota. The peoples and entities that owe government money would be another category of this particular bill. That's a do not pay list. Second bill I'm going to talk about is called I'm Not a Robot. It's Senate File 3190. The name is taken from that little checkbox that you have on a website that requires security and requires you to prove that you are who you say you are. And with this bill, we're going to do this with the medical assistance program here in Minnesota. Primarily, our Medicaid system, it would be a 2% withhold from the capitation payments that are made to managed care organizations on behalf of all of the people in the gold-plated Cadillac coverage that we provide for them. We provide very, very high quality and expensive coverages for our government programs. This would withhold from the managed care organizations. For your review, government appropriates the money. They send the money to the managed care organizations, who then manages the health plans that they have on behalf of the people that are covered throughout Minnesota. That's how it works. So what we're talking about is we're saying MCOs, you need to send, managed care organizations, you need to send a form to all of your people that you have enrolled. You need to send them a form, and then the enrollee completes the form and sends it back to the managed care organization. That form would include on it the name and street address of the enrollee, the name of the managed care plan enrolled in. Now, I went back and talked to some of these managed care organizations. They don't collect and maintain as much data as you and I might expect they do. And those of us that have employer-provided insurance or private insurance would realize that there's a huge gap missing here. This will help, I think, expose some of that. But we're going to send the card out, have the managed care organization send the card out and say, enrollee, send it back to the managed care organization. The managed care organization then will compare all of the cards that it gets across into its list of people that it's getting paid for by the government. So you're getting paid for all of these people by the government to cover them. You got how many of those cards did you get back? And then this will help prove that they are alive, that they live in Minnesota, that they intend to be enrolled, and that they're not signed up for multiple plans either in Minnesota or multiple plans in multiple states. We've seen people with as many as 5, 6, or 7 states where they are still covered, because oftentimes the state will continue to cover them long after they've moved to Tennessee or Texas or wherever they've moved to. If the managed care organization gets the form back, they will get their withhold money, their 2%, which is about $300 million. they will get their particular amount of that 2% for that form back in the following year. And if they don't get it back, the withhold for that enrollee will not be returned to the managed care organization. The capitation payments will discontinue on that particular enrollee, and then the enrollee will be disenrolled. Okay, so what some people will say, well, what will happen then if you unenroll somebody that shouldn't be? Well, it's very easy in Minnesota. What happens is the person just goes in and asks for care at a medical facility, and they're automatically enrolled. So as long as they're eligible at that point, they're automatically enrolled, and there's not any concerns. I'm adding to this and plan to add to this to take the $300 million withhold and turn that into money for the counties for their electronic systems that they need to repair the antiquated Maxis and Met system that we have in Minnesota that the counties badly want and need in order to make them more efficient in putting data in retrieving data, and helping to keep our system secure and free of fraud. Ladies and gentlemen, I referred to already back in 2016, Minnesota's problem in 2016 with institutional corruption. We're seeing it here, full speed, full blast. Here was the 2015 legislative auditor's report. Back when we had a different legislative auditor, back then in this area of Medicaid, medical assistance, the projection was as high as $271 million of waste, fraud, and abuse within our public health programs. That was back in 2015, as high as $271 million out of the sample they collected. If you extrapolate that to the entire population, back then in 2016, it was over $1 billion per biennium. The GAO in DC has come up with, we're in the neighborhood now of in the area of $1.8 billion per biennium that is being paid to dead people and people that don't qualify for it and people that have redundant coverages here in the state of Minnesota. We need to get at that and get it fixed, and that's what this bill would do. Next, we will hear from Senator Koran.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator Drazkowski. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm State Senator Mark Koran. I represent Chisago and Isanti counties, just north of the cities. Today I'm going to talk about two things. One is improving the technologies, and no bill associated with that yet, but improving technologies around Department of Health and Human Services, what we might need to do while we wait for the years before we can replace the systems within the Department of Health and Human Services. So when we talk about how to catch fraudsters, we haven't utilized the best of technologies of the 1990s, nor have we done anything to make sure that we utilize the best data available, asset determination, and utilizing all the technologies in real time so we can guarantee that each individual who is eligible for benefits gets it. That's our primary goal. No one shouldn't get them who doesn't deserve them, but we need to have a high intense eligibility determination process utilizing the best of all technologies. And one of the things that we're going to need to do is, you've heard Senator Drazkowski and everybody's talked about it, our counties have talked about it for years, we need the systems. In those years, and we're 2 to 3 years out, we're going to need to get and have probably a special project, much like we did with Senator Kreun, and have a work group to figure out what's the short-term solution. Our federal government has imposed some new standards to have more frequent eligibility determination. We're going to need to be able to bring forward and bring the best of the technology in a short period of time to be able to use the best data available to go through and help and build a system that can run in parallel to the existing solutions, and to assist all of our counties and provide actual automated eligibility determination assistance so we can meet that frequent requirement. In the state of Ohio, my career in the past has been all government and doing this type of work. But in Ohio, they had projects just like this during COVID for the unemployment. They had rapid, massive fraud. Within a couple months, they put together a series of contract vendors and brought together the best data aggregators in the country or in the world, along with the best financial data aggregators in the world, and within a couple months built the technology that they could assist all of their UI eligibility determination and make sure you can do eligibility determination, identity validation, address where you live, address where you claim to live and the one you actually live on. All those technologies are available, and our government has failed, the Walz administration has failed to put those things in place. And so we need to make sure and encourage them and the commissioners to figure out that we have a short-term emergency, one with the rampant fraud, and two with the new mandates that the federal government has. And so we hopefully will kick off a project to be able to do that. But I think that's the urgency that we have to do. What is the extraordinary efforts that we need to take place or take advantage of and make this happen? We can do it. It's been proven in other states that have been in similar situations. Want to switch gears to one that's in bill form. And so you guys remember one of my 10 years in the Senate, I've also been blessed to be a member of the Legislative Audit Commission, also the chair and the vice chair of that commission. The eyes and ears of the citizens and the legislature in the entire state. They are the ones who hold everybody compliant. But as you're aware, in January, you guys remember there was an OLA report, legislative audit report for the Department of Human Services Behavioral Health Analysis or administration, and it covered mental health services as well as addiction services. And what we found is Legislative Auditor Judy Randall found things that she hasn't seen in 27 years, where agencies created and falsified records after the audit started. Those things cannot happen. And what this bill does is it really talks about the penalties and consequences that should follow. Today, all that would be referred to as a simple HR, maybe a slap on the wrist, and maybe a subsequent warning. We need to put penalties in place that make sure and guarantee that there's a true deterrence from this type of behavior. We never imagined that we would have to create a bill to push state employees to operate at a higher moral value than what we expect them to operate in a daily basis. So we need to put together and assign some criminal penalties for somebody who doesn't comply. We've had, in the Feeding Our Future, we had them violate notice of the legislative auditor if fraud is suspected. We also discovered that there's no criminal penalties associated with that. That's in another bill and for another day. But what we're going to do is make sure that those things that are blatant lies, false information where you're fraudulently creating it from an agency personnel, and to root out and make sure that they're compliant. One of the things that they lied on were site visits. The issue, if you followed, we didn't cover it during the hearing about what particular thing did they lie on, but it was then determined that it was the site visits. They falsified them. But in that particular sample, there were 67 people or 67 businesses sampled. 27 of them, they had no records of anything. The other ones, not all of them, but they falsified some of those others that they said they were there. But even worse, the ones that they actually did do were done remotely. And I'm not sure about you, but it's very difficult to do a site visit remotely. And so they did essentially nothing. And the basic function, we've seen this across all of these programs, they failed to meet the basic obligations of doing their job. A site visit is required. It's not optional. And so with that, what we want to do is just make sure that this bill, that it deters employees from dishonesty, and we're making sure that the OLA is able to do its job, because the legislature depends on their work to make sure and modify and take their recommendations and modify state statute. Our citizens demand it. They're the only eyes and ears they have to make sure that government serves their needs as it's statutorily required. And so with that, thank you, and I will pass it off to Senator Gruenhagen. Thank you.
Good job. Thank you. Thanks for being here. And on my bill, what I want to talk about is what had been done in the past. For years, the Department of Human Services, I forgot Senator Gruenhagen, District 17, McLeod and Sibley County, and a little bit of Carver. Okay, for years, the Department of Human Service, Office of Inspector General, voluntarily sent the legislature an annual report laying out fraud investigations, overpayments, suspensions, and recoveries. After 2017, they stopped. So they were doing it on a voluntary basis. I want to thank Channel 5, by the way, because they're the ones that reported on this. Now, maybe other news stations did also, but they gave a very brief report indicating that this had stopped after 2017, and that sparked my interest, and it led to this bill. Since then, we have seen an explosion of fraud cases. Some of the largest scandals in the country, like Feeding Our Future, have happened right here in Minnesota. So we ask, why did the reporting stop right as the problem began to spiral out of control? We have lost billions to fraud and could have been used to help seniors, kids, families in crisis, and other vulnerable Minnesotans. How much of that could have been prevented if the Walz administration had not stopped issuing these voluntary reports? My bill is simple. It restores something that used to happen every year and that should have been happening all along. It requires two state agencies, the Minnesota Department of Children, Youth, and Families, and the Department of Human Services, to send detailed reports to the legislature about fraud prevention, oversight, and program integrity. Without transparency, we cannot put a stop to fraud. This is another tool in our toolbox to put an end to fraud here in the state of Minnesota and protect the taxpayer. Without transparency, we cannot put a stop to fraud. With this report, the legislature and the public will have transparency into the OIG's caseload, fraud prevention efforts, and ways in which everyone can partner together to stop rampant fraud, which I'm sure all of us want to see stopped. Put simply, this bill is about better accountability, better oversight, and better transparency for Minnesotans. It forces the Walz administration and future governors to show that their work each year and that they are taking fraud seriously, which we desperately need. Thank you. And now, Senator Holmstrom.
Hello, everyone. My name is Senator Michael Holmstrom. I serve Senate District 29, which is Wright, Meeker, and Hennepin counties. Today, I'm introducing a bill to require site visits, unannounced site visits on site for every DCF or DCYF and DHS program provider. These would be required before enrollment, before re-enrollment, and before revalidation as a condition for getting paid for medical assistance. The lack of real site visits has been very well noticed by the media. It has been the number one thing that could have prevented a lot of this fraud. We saw in Feeding Our Future. We saw in obviously daycare providers, autism providers. There are many videos out there of people going and viewing these sites in person and realizing that there was nothing there and it was obvious fraud was occurring. The failure of DHS and DCYF to actually do these site visits has been a travesty and has been noticed by the public. We demand accountability and we demand the government actually protect our dollars. Just last week, a woman named Janelle Hansen, who goes by Sky, was evicted from her apartment and left homeless. Sky has autism and was living independently through Medicaid-funded programs. Her caregivers, who subleased her apartment to her, stopped paying rent. At that same time, they were billing $421 a day for 12 hours of service. She later confirmed that most days she only saw 1 or 2 hours of that service. Now she's homeless and on the street. You might remember Hennepin County Judge Sarah West dismissing a $7.2 million guilty verdict in an alleged fraud case. During that trial, the DHS inspector, who was responsible for providing the license and doing the visits, testified that inspectors rely on the agencies and providers themselves to provide accurate information, which comes from the self-attestation of providers. Clearly, we cannot trust self-attestation for licensing. Trust without verification is negligence. And that kind of negligence over and over is why we have fraud here in Minnesota. You probably have seen the recent DHS reports that DHS is now hiring new staff to conduct site visits in high-risk Medicaid programs. They have told providers ahead of time that these inspections will be coming. So they have a few months to prepare themselves, and I'm sure anybody here can agree that if you had the time, you can sure make yourself, if you're committing fraud, you can make it look legitimate. This bill fixes that. This bill is going to require them to be unannounced, and we're going to be using the site providers' service fees to pay for these. So this is a funded mandate. We're not pushing forward an unfunded mandate. It's a common sense safeguard we can put into place to protect Minnesotan taxpayers and people like Sky who end up as casualties when fraud goes unchecked. I'm calling on Senate Democrats to join us and pass this bill, send it to the House. I appreciate your time, and I'll send it over to Leader Johnson for questions.
Well, thank you. I know this has been a rather lengthy press conference, but the reality is there are so many good bills out there that are common sense and the things that the government should have been doing for so many years. Senate Republicans are offering these solutions to our colleagues across the aisle and in the other house, because needs to be done in this state, and I think they've made the case very well for that. So at this point, we're open to some questions.
Senator Kreun, I've got a question for you. You talked about you don't want the OIG bill that was passed by the Senate to be gutted. It appears that the House DFLers tried to gut the bill this morning in the House Finance Committee. Any idea why they're trying to make such major changes to this bill?
It's a great question. I have some ideas as to why, and I have not watched the full committee hearing. I've only watched portions of it. But the two biggest provisions, and there were several changes that the Delete Everything Amendment did. The biggest one was it got rid of the law enforcement division that we had established in the Office of Inspector General. That's a critical part of this bill that our working group spent a lot of time on last year, bicameral, bipartisan. And that amendment to get that onto the bill in the Senate passed overwhelmingly. I think it might have even been a voice vote, but don't quote me on that. But it was overwhelmingly supported by Republicans and Democrats. It's what puts the teeth into that office. And so to see that come out in the Delete Everything Amendment leads me to question that maybe that, certain members of their caucus just didn't want to see that. And that's fine. That's their prerogative to not want to have a law enforcement division. But what we need to have here is some independence out of that caucus. Somebody to stand up and be a leader and to move forward with a Senate version or something very close to the Senate version to get it passed. Not to just simply say, I'm not going to move forward on this bill until everybody in my caucus agrees with it. Because then that's just assuring that it's not going to pass.
Do you believe Governor Walz, the Walz administration was involved in this effort to scuttle the bill?
I do believe that there was probably some involvement by the governor's office. The coordination council that he created by executive order, contemplated the name or co-opted the name of Office of Inspector General without actually doing anything that our bill would do. And then there's been some discussions, I'm told, about what to do about the OIG bill and to replace it with their own version, which would look very similar to the Coordination Council right now. But that's not good enough. That's not good enough for Minnesotans. We need an independent office that has teeth, that's able to do its job effectively.
But in light of that setback, how do you feel about bipartisan, bicameral solutions a couple days in? What seemed like a sure thing is falling apart.
Well, I mean, it's stalled, but it's not dead. We still have time in this legislative session. And as I've said before, I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and do work on this bill and to do some common sense amendment, to tweak it here, to tweak it there. But we're not going to move backwards. And so in the spirit of what we did last year, if the House Democrats are serious about passing this bill, they should work in a bipartisan, bicameral manner like we did all of last year. Not spring a delete everything amendment that makes major changes to the bill after we've done a full year of work without, by the way, notifying me or anybody in my caucus and without involving the House Republicans. That is not how we did our work last year. That's not bipartisan. That's not how we ended up with the good product that we ended up with. The House Democrats need to change course and do better. They need to start working in a collaborative manner. We need some leaders in that caucus to stand up and work in a bipartisan manner.
The reason given to the,
Let me add a little bit if I can. I was involved in bringing together a working group last year. It's, as Senator Kreun mentioned, it's bipartisan. We had, in the House, we had both Democrats that are supposedly leading the effort in the House, and they were part of our working group. And they were there for all the meetings, Senator Kreun, every one of them. We met hours upon hours. And they went over to the House, installed it, which I just find, I mean, certainly they should not speak for their entire caucus if they're for something, but obviously they're leading the against. And I also mentioned Senator Gustafson did a great job, I think, as an author in the Senate. As a matter of fact, as part of our working group as well. And as a matter of fact, she resisted, Tom, efforts from the governor to scuttle the bill. I was in State Government Finance Committee, and Senator Gustafson shows me her phone. Tim Walz, it says on it. And so she goes and takes a call, and she comes back, and I say, well, Heather, what the governor want? He wants me to withdraw my bill. And she did not withdraw her bill. She stood in there in the bipartisan manner that we laid out in that working group and stood in, and we all stood there together throughout the time. We're not seeing that in the House. Obviously, he's having that influence in the House, and that's the perspective that I can provide.
Kreun, the reason given for the portion you talked about, the removal of the law enforcement powers, was that basically it's duplicative to what the BCA already does. With that in mind, can you speak to that argument, and also do you, like, just more broadly, why you think the OIG needs to have its own law enforcement bureau and that the BCA doesn't fit in that?
The answer why the Office of Inspector General needs its own law enforcement division is simple. It's for independence. It's for independence. And the law enforcement division within the OIG, of course, should work hand in glove with the BCA. And our bill contemplates that, and I would expect that to happen. But it needs to have its own independent law enforcement division.
Do you not trust the BCA to be independent on that?
Look, I think the BCA does tremendous work. I'm not here to disparage the BCA, but when you're making statute, you have to look long-term into the future. It's not just based simply on the current environments. So even though I trust the BCA right now to do good work, it's not the best way to write statute, because ultimately you need that independence, and there could become a superintendent in the future or a governor with undue influence over the BCA that could stall out important work. And that's why you need to have that independence into this OIG into the many years into the future.
Senator Gustafson also used that phrase that it's stalled, but it's not dead. How worried are you about this setback?
Well, I mean, this is politics, right? And we have some time, and you have to remain optimistic. I mean, otherwise, why be here? Why do the work, right? So I'm going to be optimistic, and I'm going to offer my services, even though it's already passed the Senate, even though we did our work last year. I'll still, as long as I can find a partner, a good faith partner, that says they need to make some changes to the bill, that doesn't gut the bill, that moves the bill forward, makes it more effective and not move it backwards, I'm willing to put that work in. And if we can just have that spirit, I'm very confident that we can get this done in the House and get it signed into law.
Is there a fiscal note to the package?
Well, there was a fiscal note last year when it passed the Senate. It was a very modest one, $9 million. Whether that DE today changed that, I'm not sure. I think it changed it.
Can someone speak broadly to some of the technological upgrades? I know I've heard from some, at least like local governments before, that like their IT is stuck in 1980 and it would be super costly to upgrade that, and we're talking about, tight resources around here. Do you anticipate some of these technological changes to cost a lot of money?
I would anticipate when you talk about the core health and human services solutions, which our counties depend on, and that inefficiency has been passed down to the counties, not only in the work or the challenge in work environment, but the cost onto our local taxpayers and through our levies. But it's likely a couple $100 million, right? Maybe as high as $500 million when you look at it. Today, there's been
Everything you're talking about here, or just if you're accounting for the counties that you
not the counties, there's separate, right? Counties have ancillary services. We haven't seen the scope of work of if the new system would take on all of the data requirement. You know, today counties have 5 different types of data document imaging systems. They don't communicate with each other, right? So they have their own unique needs. We're not sure if the state will provide them. It'd be great if we do, because we only have one individual, or we have an individual with need, and it's the same individual regardless of which county they live in. And it's a very transient population. And today, I think you heard in Health and Human Services, they have to photocopy, send a PDF by mail to another county of a record which was paper, which they imaged into an electronic record, which they then subsequently print, or if it's Hennepin County, they put on a thumb drive because there's so many of them and mail it. So the system itself, there's a role, and we haven't seen whether they're going to take on that role of being the core repository for all records, which they should. In some cases, the state should be the single repository for all of it. But it's probably a few $100 million at a minimum. But today, there's so many changes in the last 30 years that there's more commercial off-the-shelf available packages. We're doing some of our own due diligence out there right today. But the things we talked about is that's going to be 2 or 3 years out, even in the best case scenario, that you have a highly configurable solution that we can bring in and only modify, you know, the 15, upwards of 15% in custom programming. And so we've got to figure out, there are ways in rapid application development that we could probably assist, especially if we target the SNAP eligibility determination when we have to do it multiple times a year. We should be able to utilize technology so it's mostly automated to be able to do those types of things and ease that burden for our counties if we choose to utilize the best of all data that's available. And we've seen states where they have done that in kind of an emergency mode around fraud and COVID. I think we're in that type of mode where we might have to make that investment. And I don't think it's going to be a significant investment, but we have to have a commitment that the governor's interested in actually solving that problem. And we could have the same type of work ethic. Michael and Steve didn't cover that fraud or the OIG activity that we did. We met every single Tuesday, every single week of the legislative session. And then secondarily, there's a subset of us that met every single Friday with OIGs across the country, in addition to the OIG association, to make sure we had literally the best of everything that we could possibly have, dynamic in nature or independent in nature. And we didn't mention it, but it would also then, the seed money, the $9 million is really to start it up. But it would then encapsulate, and the goal would bring in all of the inspector general or the criminal divisions, which are in the 10 primary agencies. So when it goes to investigation, right, investigation and referral for prosecution, we have that global view over all agencies. And it's not just the fraud that we mentioned today. We're measuring the hard dollars that are stolen, right, cash and services. But what about the IT infrastructure? How do we build those types of technologies in global? Because we're under assault as a state from many different directions. So it's really about that central independent inspector general that we will build in those types of disciplines and the technologies necessary for forensic auditing and all the types of things we need to go out and collect the data, surveil all those tools, and then refer for prosecution.
Say, Leader Johnson, are you having to increase the cost of government, the size of government to deal with these issues?
So we've seen reports this summer that $9 billion of fraud have walked out the door. What you're seeing here are efforts to invest small projects or big projects with small dollars relative to the fraud that's going on. We want to protect Minnesotans' taxpayer dollars. They're dealing every day with affordability issues. What this is making sure that Minnesotans can afford life in this state. So these small investments are not burdening Minnesota. In fact, we're protecting them from the cost of their hard-earned taxpayer dollars going out in waste, fraud, and abuse. Minnesotans are angry, and this is a response to what Minnesotans are asking for.
Just a reminder, we're bringing forward innovative ideas to stop and end fraud in this state. The bill I mentioned, I'm not a robot. As I mentioned, we could take the withhold money and use the $300 million to fix the technology problem for the counties across the whole state, across all of their welfare programs. What we need is commitment from the Democrats to join us on these innovative solutions so we can stop fraud, fix our county programs, and be good going forward.
Senator Rasmusson, your spending monitor bill, why would spending above 5% trigger, or sorry, is that just Medicaid spending or is that overall spending within DHS? And then why go to the OLA rather than do some sort of department? I don't know, what, I guess, does the OLA need more resources? Can you just like walk through that a little bit more?
Great question. So this bill would cover all forecasted programs within DHS and DCYF. And one of the challenges we have with these forecasted programs is they effectively go on autopilot. If they're 50% more than was budgeted for during the legislative session, those agencies just continue to spend. And when we go to those agencies and ask them, for example, on autism services, their answer was, well, there's more need than what we expected. Unfortunately, that was not true. There was more fraud than people expected. And why we need to have an independent legislative auditor come in and do a review when we have a program that's overspending is to make sure that we have the information as legislators to have the proper oversight to know that we need to make changes to the program and how it's implemented.
Okay, so then the 10%, legislators would come in and then analyze that audit that was done at a 5% spending increase, is that right?
Good question. So at 5%, the legislative auditor will come in and do a review of the program, explain to us what's going on. And then if it goes to 10%, effectively the second year appropriation would be put on pause and would force the legislature to review that program, make any reforms or changes, and then approve additional spending before the session ended.
Investigation into fraud in the Walz administration seems to have stalled out. Joseph Thompson and other people have resigned from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Is there anything that you as legislators can do in terms of maybe putting pressure on the State Attorney General's office or other parts of government in order to get a better understanding of the scope of fraud in the Walz administration?
Yeah, I appreciate that question a great deal, because you got the nuance there as well of our AG really picking up the ball, and that's really where a lot of the investigation should have started back when these reports were coming in back in 2018 onward. And so we were really hoping that he would pick that up. Unfortunately, it's fallen very hard on the U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute these crimes. They've done that. They're going through a transition period now. I know earlier there was some resignations, but it looks like they're starting up the indictments again, and they've hired some new staff there as well, too, to get the office into place to really pick up where they left off before. So I think you're going to be seeing an increased effort on the legal side of really following these fraud allegations going forward.
Any expectations for the forecast next week?
Maybe we'll get into that here in a few minutes, but let's do that.
2:52, so I know members have committees. If you need to head out, and we can move to off topics. Is there any more fraud? Are there any more fraud questions?
Senator, what, if anything, can any of these proposals do to help prosecute here?
Do we want to just, are you talking about the fraud issue?
Yeah.
Oh, on the,
Maybe, Kreun, you want to answer that?
yeah, why don't we go over this way then?
So the question, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, what, if any, of these proposals can do to help assist in the prosecution of these cases?
Well, the prosecution is going to have to be done by the prosecuting agencies, which should be primarily the state attorney general. But what we've seen, the state attorney general has not done a very good job in prosecuting the fraud and has had to rely heavily on the U.S. Attorney's Office. There has been some talk, there was some talk last year in our working group in the Office of Inspector General bill as we were going through all of these things about potentially adding some prosecution powers to the Office of Inspector General bill. That's not where we ended up landing. And if we can get these legislative reforms through, and we notice that there's a bottleneck with prosecution, that's something that can be revisited down the road to make sure that we have the prosecutorial resources that we need to get fraud under control in Minnesota.
In addition to, so we've had people transfer or move out or resign from the FBI's office, but I was in DC last week and we've received confirmation that Mike Stewart, who is the general counsel for the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services, has a team of 700 attorneys and investigators, and Minnesota is their priority to come and assist and fill that void to ensure that that prosecution occurs, or the investigations continue and the prosecution occurs.
Awesome.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
well done. numbers. I have no idea what that's gonna be looking like right now.
I've heard businesses say that, you know, with the immigration action, they're very concerned that the numbers may not be accurate, that we really don't know what revenue looks like.
And that could very well be. I mean, hopefully we'll start seeing a little bit on the revenue numbers this forecast, but then we get some monthly updates on what they look like. So we should be able to see kind of what the numbers are on that as well too.
What other programs are you looking at other than PFML?
What's that?
What other programs are you keyed in on? You said PFML?
Yep. What do you mean on that one?
You said there were other programs you were looking at in terms of spending.
Well, it's on the spending side of things. So that will impact, I'm worried about the revenue side on that one, Rochelle, is because,
What are you looking at?
well, that's one of them. I mean, where are the incomes coming in from? What are the tax receipts looking like? What are our revenues coming into that account look like, right? And then we're gonna have some expense sides, but look at the DHS programs. Those we've seen when we had the child care issues, or we had the DHS, or with the Feeding Our Future, that was through the public or the education department. Some of those you saw massive jumps and increases in the program costs, and that really got to what Senator Rasmusson's bill is trying to identify is why are those costs jumping? Are we gonna be seeing more fraud in these programs or are we not? So those are some of the deals we'll be looking at.
Leader Johnson, regarding the Democrats' ICE bills, immigration bills, other than, you know, having some sort of bill to have the counties and municipalities work with the feds regarding detainers and whatnot, are those bills, other than the forcing cooperation, are those non-starters for your caucus?
Well, first of all, we haven't seen the bills. I know there was a press conference earlier, so we haven't seen the language on the bills themselves. But I also am concerned that Democrats are going to spend a lot of committee time in the Senate talking about these bills that they want to get through, that we're going to be taking votes on, that ultimately it will be federal jurisdiction, and our action here will have little impact on that. At the same time, Minnesotans are struggling with affordability in the state. They're struggling with the fraud that's going on. They're struggling with the mandates that are happening in the state. And so, you know, for us, we're gonna continue to focus on the important things, what Minnesotans are looking at day in and day out, and the things that we can control. Not these political slogans that Democrats are putting up now. And hopefully, they won't be wasting time on things that we can't control. But it seems like that's the way that they're gonna be going.
Senator Latz has one bill as it relates to ICE to have the BCA be on the investigations for shootings involving federal officers. Would you support that? Could you see bipartisan support on that bill specifically?
Well, again, you know, what the BCA is doing and what the feds are investigating on that, the feds can really have the supremacy on that one and saying, here's how we're gonna operate. And I don't believe that we can legislate our way into those investigations. So I would like to see what the bill language looks like and what our jurisdictional areas are. But again, I hope that's not an area where we're gonna end up spending all Friday tomorrow discussing this, and ultimately, what that will be is a federal jurisdiction issue.
You mentioned affordability. Are there specific pieces of legislation Republicans are proposing in this session that would make life more affordable for people in Minnesota?
Stay tuned. We'll have a press conference on it.
So for the Democrats' argument regarding the supremacy issue with the immigration enforcement bills, their argument is that the surge we saw in Minnesota was so unique and Minnesota was such an outlier that the state should do something and to take action, even if it will get overturned in the federal courts. What do you think of that argument?
I don't think this has been unique. I mean, we've seen other states have federal law enforcement. Sorry. Federal law enforcement have entered, done operations within them. There is precedent, recent precedent. There has been longstanding precedent on this one. I think we are in a situation where that argument is novel that Senator Latz brought up, but I don't think it really holds water.
Is there any benefit to you or to your caucus of not getting all these fraud proposals done if you can continue running on that issue?
We would love to get that done. Our number one concern is Minnesotans. These are things that Minnesotans have asked for, the counties have asked for. You know, for us, this is something that we want to get done. These are not bills that we're out here for political posturing at all. This is just things that are so common sense that would have such a great effect on this state. I would be excited if we could get that done this year, and I'm hoping that we can. And we're gonna see our authors working across the aisle and trying to get the support that they need to get done for Minnesota.
We obviously heard a lot about fraud, all your proposals today. There was some mention about the resignations at the US Attorney's Office and how that is impacting fraud investigations. You know, the top prosecutors on fraud have left. Does that concern you about being able to hold these people accountable if the people who know this issue better than anybody are no longer in the office?
What concerns me is that if those people are considered the ones that know the most on fraud, what is our Attorney General doing? He had the responsibility to do this from the very beginning. And he should have been taking this very seriously at that point. Unfortunately, he's behind the 8 ball on this one, and he's trying to build the office up over there. Fortunately, our federal side, they already have made some hires. They're getting back to indicting folks on that one. You're going to see some of that coming out. So they're building that office back up, and I feel fully confident that we're going to have the resources there to do the jobs to help protect Minnesotans as the Attorney General struggles to do so.
Representative Stevenson has mentioned an idea of adding prosecutors to the State Attorney General's office for the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. Would your caucus be in support of maybe spending money to add more prosecutors to the State Attorney General's office?
Yeah, I'd like to see what that proposal is, and if it's a temporary position or if it's a full-time or what that looks like. But I think that we could find some common ground. But again, like to see what that ultimately looks like.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Say, US one.